Hello, today is Thursday the 19th of March. It's the fourth week of my video journals. This is actually a lot more casual than normal. Normally I will set my phone up properly to film, but this is the way I'm feeling today, and I woke up about half an hour ago. So yeah, this is what I'm doing. So this week I organised my photography plans with my photographer, which went well. She's more than happy to do it, and she said that she's going to look into booking a photography studio for me, which is really handy, and I'm really thankful for that. Moving on to my sketchbook work, I started looking at the collaborative artists, first of all with Philip Tracy, who worked very closely with McQueen. He also had Isabella Blow as a muse, so they worked a lot together. McQueen and Tracy did do a collaborative show together when Isabella Blow died. Obviously McQueen's sort of designs had a big impact on that show. Like I said before, Tracy and McQueen did work very closely together, and Tracy did actually do the headpieces for a lot of McQueen shows. So obviously they would have a lot of McQueen influence on them, and they were very dark. They held a sense of depression. A lot of them would actually sort of cover and cage the face, which again shows quite a sinister aspect to it. A lot of them were black and red. Those two colours are the kind of two colours that are sort of standing out for me most at the moment. I think they hold a lot of McQueen but are very dark, and they were actually my favourite pieces that I looked at from Philip Tracy's designs. But as well as that, I think his own designs showed a lot of similarities to McQueen. He liked flowers and butterflies and all sorts of those things, so yeah, you can see that he rubbed off on him. Inspired by his work, I drew up my own design of a headpiece. The headpiece is inspired by his real life flower design, his monarch butterfly design, and his antler design, which all three I looked at earlier on in the book. So I started making that headpiece, but I haven't finished it yet. I'm sort of taking a break on that. Whether that's a good idea or not, I don't know. I also experimented with gold wire and created a bird wing inspired by his feather designs, which I'm not sure if I like it or not. I do like the form of it, but I think I made it quite messily. I think it would look really good if I made it properly and professionally. At the moment, I'm not sure whether to go down the headpiece route. I thought that would be a really good idea to incorporate in the hair and go along with the makeup designs, but looking at the amount of time I have and how long it's taking me to do everything, I don't think I'm going to have enough time to design a makeup design as well as designing a headpiece and making a headpiece and all that. So although I think it's a really good idea, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it, but it was nice to look at it anyway and experiment. So moving on, I then looked at Damien Hirst, who is a very famous artist, who did a collaboration with McQueen. I think the skull motif scarves that McQueen made and have become very, very popular. The patterns are really, really interesting. They basically made kaleidoscopes using butterflies and all sorts of creepy crawlies. They made a lot of very pretty patterns, but they also had a lot of the butterflies make a form that looked like a skull, if that makes sense. So obviously already seeing the McQueen influence on that. Damien Hirst's influences were very similar to McQueen's as well. He was fascinated by death and the life cycle and how animals can be preserved and dissected and all that sort of stuff. So that shows a strong link to McQueen because he loved death and sort of all that stuff. Line of scarf prints was actually advertised using a short film filmed by Solveig Sundsbo, I think it's pronounced. But that photographer is really interesting for me, and I'm going to move on and talk about him later. Inspired by Damien Hirst, I actually created my own kaleidoscopes using the monarch butterfly and the purple flowers. I did that using the AUB K-Scope app, which is really good fun, and it's actually really funny if you do it on your own face. The monarch butterfly kaleidoscopes are much more interesting than the flower kaleidoscopes, I think, because it's such intense, strong orange colours contrasted with the dark black outlines. It is just so strong. There's really interesting patterns made by the butterfly wings, and I think it's just so much more powerful and holds more of a McQueen sense to it. The purple flower designs are still really interesting and hold a lot of detail, but has as much of a McQueen feel to them. But I do still really like them, and I've really enjoyed doing those kaleidoscopes. I think the butterfly kaleidoscope designs could perhaps be made into some sort of makeup design. I don't know if that would be too intense. I'm not sure if I'm liking that idea, but it is a possibility, so I'm going to think about that. Moving on, I looked at MAC Cosmetics. MAC for McQueen, which is the name of the makeup line, was the result of a collaboration between McQueen and MAC Cosmetics. MAC actually worked backstage for McQueen since like 1996, I think it is. So they obviously know the McQueen band really well. Most of the products in the collection were actually hand blended specifically for the Autumn/Winter 2007 show. I have to say, this collaboration hasn't really inspired me that much. The makeup line, I personally think, doesn't actually hold much of a McQueen feel. I guess it was made to match that particular line, but I personally think it's a little bit too light and airy. It's very light blues and neutral colours, which I don't think is very McQueen. But I guess that's my personal opinion. I have made my own eye makeup design to go along with it, which I practiced and photographed, which is all in my sketchbook, which is good fun and I like the design, but again, I don't think it's very McQueen. But I'm really glad I looked at it, and it's obviously interesting because it actually associates makeup with McQueen and not just the fashion and clothing and stuff. But yeah, that's done. I'm glad I did it, but I don't think I'll take much from it for my final piece. Then I moved on to Vogue photographers. First of all, with Lado Alexi and John Rawlings. I'm not going to go into too much detail about what their photography is about. It's all like fashion photography and focuses on like models with makeup. The biggest thing I picked up from both of them is the fact that the backgrounds of the images are all very either neutral or grey, which is actually really effective because it makes the foreground stand out. They've got such bright colour and intense designs, which really contrast the plain background, and I think that works really well and will definitely be something I'll consider when I take my final photos. Looking at Lado Alexi's designs, I actually was really drawn to what was actually in the images. The models and the makeup were really like bright and intense, and I really liked it. Inspired by that, I did do a makeup design where I used the colours of the monarch butterfly, so lots of bright orange. Doing this design, although I really like it, I definitely think I need to go down a darker route for McQueen. But I like the design, I'm glad I did it, and I can consider it for final piece. And finally, I looked at the photographer that I mentioned earlier, Solveig Sundsbo. Still don't think that's the way you're meant to pronounce it, because he was born in Norway, so I don't know. No idea. Photographer and filmmaker, and he actually did the photography for the Alexander McQueen Savage Beauty book, which is where I've got a lot of my inspiration and information from. So the clothes are photographed on models, but then the models are edited to make them look like mannequins, which is obviously a really interesting concept. It means that the clothes are sitting naturally on a human body, but then the attention is kept on the clothes because it's not real people. Rather than having the attention on the models, it completely gives all the attention to the clothes. I think it's a really good representation of modern day photography, and this whole technique of photography has already really inspired me, and I think I'm kind of considering it for my final piece, maybe making my model look like a mannequin, so then my makeup piece is a makeup piece rather than a model in makeup, if that makes sense. But that's something I can think about more at the time. As well as that, I think it could add the extra McQueen tweak to it, because obviously that was used in McQueen's designs, so I think that'd be good to keep it a very McQueen themed final piece. So overall, I think this research has been the best research so far, particularly with Philip Tracy. You could really see where the McQueen inspiration is in there, and you can tell that he worked very closely with him when you look at his work. I'm really glad that I discovered this Solveig Sundsbo, still not pronouncing it right. Again, like I said, good representation of modern photography, and has really inspired me. Although I have done more experimentation, I think I could do a lot more, but I'm gonna work on that more next week. I think I'm doing really well with my time plan. I'm sticking to it well, I'm on track, and the whole project is actually going really well, and I'm really happy with it, so I'm feeling confident. So next week I'm going to try and do more experimentation alongside the artists, like I said before. I'm now going to move on and look at makeup artists who worked with McQueen and also worked for Vogue. So next week should be really interesting, getting into the more makeup side of it. But overall, I think the project's going really well and I'm really happy with it. So I will see you next week. Goodbye. Hello, today is Thursday the 26th of March and it is my 5th video journal. So this week I've been looking at makeup artists, first of all Vogue makeup artists. The first one I looked at was Marla Belt. The first thing you notice about Marla Belt's designs is she uses a lot of bright colour. which is sort of accentuated by hints of black, with some very dark, thick lines, particularly around the eyes, and then maybe some very like dark, intense lip colour and sometimes red. She then uses the addition of other materials with what looks like a leather eyebrow, studs and shiny wires, again uses eyebrows. The use of these extra materials and the intense lip colour gives the model a sense of power and strength, which I think is really important when you're doing a piece based on McQueen, because he loved women, he looked up to women, and he liked to show their strength and their willpower. So I think that will be really relevant to take onto a final design. In response to that, I drew up my own makeup design using the colours of the flower design that I have previously mentioned, and black. Two colours that I have already mentioned have really stood out for me in this project. Alongside the bright colours, I also did a black sort of feather pattern sort of inside the eye, as well as a strong red lip colour. Then I applied some gold foil for the eyebrows and a little bit on the lip, which I think gave a lot of structure to the face, again showing the strength. Really interested in using the red colour for the lips because, again, it's very powerful and very intense, which is exactly the kind of look I'm wanting to go for. Next up, I looked at Gina Brooke, whose work really excited me. I was instantly drawn towards it. Her makeup involves a lot of heavy embellishment using gems, studs and feathers, so like Marla Belt uses the extra materials. She's renowned for her eyelash designs, of which have been worn by people like Madonna and Lady Gaga. The extravagant eye designs make her designs really eye-catching. Again, in response to that, I made my own eyelash designs using feathers and gems, etc. I went for a black and red theme, but I think the addition of the gold in these designs is very reminiscent of McQueen's final show, which involved a lot of red and gold. And I'm really liking the royal aspect to it because he was such like a big part of fashion. It's like he's been crowned at the end of his career before he sadly dies. I think the use of a heavily embellished eyelash would be really good to use in my final piece to intensify the eyes, again to show the empowerment of women and show strength in my model. And then we moved on to Lloyd Simmons. He was trained by Pat McGrath, who is another makeup artist that worked really closely with McQueen. He's appeared in multiple fashion magazines, including Harper's Bazaar, Elle, and obviously Vogue. His designs are quite different to the other two. He uses a lot of rich colour, but with simple designs. So even though the images may not necessarily be about the makeup, it's certainly noticeable because of the use of bright colour. I did my own makeup in the style of Simmons. This time I actually did the makeup. I used the purple colour from the flowers. I'm not quite sure why I'm going for these purple flower colours because it's not actually my favourite design of all of his. Like, I love it, but for my project I don't think I'm going to use much influence from it. For some reason I'm using the colours, but I just think they work quite well. The simple style of makeup could be used alongside either an extravagant hair design or a headpiece. I know I've said that I'm not really verging towards the headpiece side, but it's still like something to take into consideration. So moving on to McQueen makeup artists, I first looked at Peter Phillips, who is the artist who created the very well-known McQueen makeup, which featured red lipstick being applied beyond the lip line. If you know McQueen's work well, I am sure you probably would have seen this makeup look. Some say that it looks a bit silly, but others see like the intimidation that it projects and like the power that it shows. And I think the makeup actually really fits into the line of clothing that it was a part of as well. He focused a lot on hair designs, which includes weaving and plaits, alongside what tends to be very simple makeup. His other makeup, which is not for McQueen, includes a lot of eyebrow embellishment and some makeup that actually like looks like paintings. So there's one that's like brightly coloured geometric shapes, a couple that look a bit like clowns, and then a painted face that looks a little bit like a painting. They're not relevant to the stuff he did for McQueen, but I think it's still really interesting to see like his workflow and what he's inspired by. And then after Peter Phillips, the last artist that I've looked at is Pat McGrath, who I mentioned earlier with Lloyd Simmons. She's actually called the most influential makeup artist in the world by Vogue, which is a pretty good title to have, so she should be proud of that one. But I can see why. The designs she did for McQueen are very simple. It's very natural makeup, but with intense like dark feathers around the eyes. As I know from all my research, feathers are a big thing for McQueen, so I think that's an important feature to have in my final piece. Her non-McQueen designs are very bright colours, particularly around the eyes. One of the big things that stood out for me is her use of like paper cutouts, either applied to the face or made to look like huge eyebrows and huge lips and It's quite comical but really, really interesting. These make for like a really eye-catching look that have certainly grabbed my attention. So a lot of the makeup looks that I've seen that go with the McQueen shows are quite simple, but I think that's because they're in contrast with the very like garish clothing that McQueen made. Because my pieces are just a makeup design, I think it's very important that they're very detailed and are very attention grabbing, if that's the way to say it. Overall, I've really enjoyed looking at the makeup artists this week, particularly Marla Belt, Gina Brooke and Pat McGrath. They've been like the most inspiring to me. I really like the heavy makeup designs. This week has actually given me a lot of ideas for a final piece and my design development, so I'm really excited to start that final piece designing process. I'm supposed to have started some Pat McGrath experimentation by now, but I'm a day or so behind on my time plan, which isn't ideal, but it's doable, so it's fine. I'm still sort of on track, so I'm gonna try and start that. But I do feel like I really need to start getting into my design process now, because everyone else in my group seems to have already started even making their final pieces, which I think is a little bit early. I'm not worried about the time I have, but I do think that I should maybe get started on designing and then move swiftly on to designing. But before I do, I think I'm gonna sort of brainstorm and break down the research, because I've done so much research. It's sort of all got a little bit lost in my head, so I'm gonna have to try and break that down, and pick out the bits I've liked, pick the bits I don't like, and see what I'm gonna take forward. And then obviously, like I said, start the design process and get that ball rolling. But yeah, I'm feeling confident about the course. I'm really enjoying it, and I think I'm going to do well, if I'm honest. Not to sound arrogant, but yeah, I'm feeling confident about it. So I'll see you later and see you next week. Hello, today is Thursday the 2nd of April and this is my 6th video log. I'm quite tired today. I've just been at work and I work with children, so I think that explains it. And I also feel a bit rubbish. I'm feeling a bit coldy. But never mind, I'll power through anyway. So it's been the first week of our Easter break. I was going to go home for the whole 2 weeks, but I decided to stay at uni so I could get a good amount of work done before I go home next week, because I can't imagine I'd get much work done at home. I had to go up and book the studio myself, but it turns out that they're not open beyond the 2nd of April. So today. They're not open beyond today. But it's not too much of a worry because we can set up our own studio. My needs are fairly basic, so it shouldn't be too complicated. At the start of this week, was actually kind of the end of last week, I had a midway critique with my tutor and my fellow students who are also going into makeup next year. Most of my tutor's points were exactly what I was thinking anyway. I had great and thorough research, but should drop anything that I'm doing and move on to designing, as I'm a little bit behind everyone else regarding the research process, which I completely agree with. I've actually finished all my research now anyway, so from that day I was then moving on to designing anyway, so it doesn't it was right, but I knew it anyway. Unfortunately, that means I can't do the Pat McGrath development that I was intending to do. I think that's something that I'm just going to go back on and do later. In my project proposal, I said that I would do some textiles techniques, which is what I was intending to do with the McGrath development. So I am needing to do that at some point to fit my project proposal. To be honest, I don't think it would have had much of an impact on my final piece anyway, because this is sort of the route I was kind of thinking of, but I'll definitely do it because I kind of need to. First thing that my tutor suggested was to break down my research, which again was exactly what I was going to do anyway. Apparently I shouldn't stick to my time plan too much, which I find a bit odd because my time plan has actually worked really well for me so far. He said that the design plan should have been planned much earlier, which I do agree with because I am feeling a little bit behind. I found it a bit odd because another tutor, when I first wrote my time plan, said that it was well laid out and I had really considered each process and stage. So obviously I just assumed that it was fine because another tutor told me it was fine, and then my tutor was telling me that your time plan isn't always correct, and so I was a bit like, well, he said it was, blah, 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 but it doesn't matter. It's done now, and I know what I'm doing. It was really interesting to see where everyone else was in their project. Obviously much more interesting because they're all doing makeup. It kind of keeps your attention rather than when you're doing like a whole group critique. But yeah, it was nice to see where their themes had been taken, and a few had actually been taken in a very different direction to what I would have imagined when they pitched their ideas. It just goes to show how different people's perspective change from person to person. So I started breaking down my research, which I've all done in my book, but I figured I might as well say it now. So birds, particularly feathers, have been a big one for me. The fact that feathers, particularly black feathers, were featured a lot in his designs. So again, keeps it very McQueen themed. Butterflies, the monarch butterfly from one of his designs I looked at the beginning. I am loving the butterfly wing detail. Really interesting how they've got such strong structures in the patterns, but are actually a very delicate thing. I guess kind of how you could describe women. They are very strong, but are considered more delicate compared to man, which goes into the whole McQueen, loving women, being inspired by women, all of that thing. Then there's the flower designs of the flower dress that I've featured a lot in my project actually. I think it would make for a beautiful and very pretty final piece. It's a good representation of the life cycle that McQueen was really interested in, because he loved death and the way sort of life ran. However, I don't think I'll be able to show the dark and like depressive side of his designs if I went for the flower theme. I think it's a really important factor to consider into my designs, and I just don't think it's going to quite grasp it. Don't know if I'm going to take that forward as a design theme, but I think it could be really interesting. Lace and antlers, and the designs that featured them were really interesting and beautiful, particularly with the antlers showing a lot of strength and power. However, I wasn't too inspired by the design when I was going through my experimental development. I don't think they capture the depressive dark side that McQueen had in a lot of his designs. I did actually really enjoy creating the antlers for my little like flower headpiece. I actually loved that design, and I would have loved to go down that route, but I just don't think it was McQueen enough. So then there's royalty. I think the small additions of gold that I've done in my experimentation have been really effective. I love the way that it gives the impression that the model is of importance, especially as McQueen was such an important role in the fashion industry. First of all, McQueen's personal life, how his depression and the stress of the industry and his relationship with Isabella Blow, and how it had such an influence on his work, I think was so important to include in my final piece, because it was what so many of his pieces were based around. So yeah, that's going to be really important to feature. So I'm definitely going to keep to like the darkness and sadness of it all, really. So what am I taking from the artists that I've researched? First of all, Lado, Alexi and John Rawlings, who were the Vogue photographers. I was inspired by the way they photographed their images with a neutral grey background, which is what I want to do for mine. As I said before, it just keeps the background from having any sort of effect on the main makeup piece. Solveig Sundsbo, who still I don't think I'm pronouncing right. I'm pretty sure I'm going to follow the mannequin idea. I think it will add to sort of the creepiness and darkness of it from an aesthetic point of view. But I also think it adds an extra McQueen twist on it, as of course Sundsbo did that for the McQueen book. Marla Bell and Pat McGrath. Marla Bell being a Vogue makeup artist and Pat McGrath being Vogue and a McQueen makeup artist. They're both a big influence regarding the application of extra materials such as foils, gems and studs. The extra materials just make it so much more interesting and much more avant-garde haute couture. Again, I think these more sturdy materials show strength and power and give the whole look a sense of stability. Marla Bell, who I've just mentioned, as well as Lloyd Simmons and Peter Phillips, have all given me inspiration to use very intense and bright lip colour. I think I'm going to experiment with both very dark sort of black lips as well as bright red lips, both of which I think show a lot of strength and power, and of course are empowering to the model, who is sort of representing women, who again McQueen loved women, was inspired by women, all of that. And then there's Gina Brooke, who has inspired me to create my own eyelashes. Eyelashes I think are going to accentuate the eyes, as well as sort of hiding them at the same time, which I think is very reminiscent of the way a lot of the headpieces that Philip Tracy made for McQueen sort of hid and trapped the face, while still making the models look really strong, which is the kind of thing I want to show in mine. McQueen was a very strong character, a very strong part of the fashion industry, but was very vulnerable. On the inside, he gave sort of this macho appearance, but was very vulnerable, which is fairly obvious when you you know, realised he actually died, committed suicide even, because of the stress and the pressure that's put on him. So I think it's a very important aspect to think about when creating a design inspired by McQueen. Next, I gathered colour paper, tissue paper, and did paint colour samples to show the colour range of the butterfly theme, the flower theme, and the royal theme. This is basically for if I decide to use the application of paper and foils in my final piece, much like the way Pat McGrath did in hers. So far regarding my design development, I've started drawing my butterfly themed designs in my initial designs, but I haven't got much further than that. I was hoping to get all of my initial sketches done. So far I've only got 3 sketches done, and I wanted 8, I think, altogether, so I've got a bit of progress to do. Overall, breaking down all my research I think was a really good idea. It's really helped me clear my mind, and should really help me make good and creative decisions in my design process. Like I said, I haven't done as much designing as I wanted to, so next week I'm going to have to do a lot more design work, which means I'm going to have to just suck it up and do more work at home than I wanted, but that's just the way it's going to have to be. It shouldn't be too bad because I do enjoy doing the designing. But yeah, that's this week's entry over, I think. Not much more to say, but I'll see you next week. Bye!